Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Irish border after Brexit are continuing to cause problems for the UK government. Let's go live to Dublin now, where we can speak to our correspondent Darren McCaffrey. And Darren, we're in a standoff situation again, aren't we?
Yeah, we really are. We've got this position from the European Union on the Irish border, which says that they want it written down legally, that they will remain a frictionless border, and that they are prepared to see Northern Ireland essentially stay in the customs union, be given special status to ensure that takes place. We've heard also from the Prime Minister, Theresa May, at Prime Minister's Question Time today, saying that that does not go, that she cannot allow that to happen. So we have got this somewhat of a stalemate. Now, many people are referencing back to the December agreement. That was what led to the end of phase one, when there was this fudge on the border. And essentially the position of the Irish government is that the commitment that the British government made to the DUP, i.e. that there wouldn't be a border in the Irish Sea, Sarah, well, that was, they would say, an internal political commitment made between the British government and the Democratic Unionist Party, of course, who are supporting Theresa May in that supply and confidence deal. But ultimately, what they want to see, and what the UK government has committed to the EU, is that there will be no border on the island of Ireland. In saying that, if there is room for compromise, it is that this is a draft agreement, that it is open to negotiation, and that ultimately the British and Irish governments and the European Union say that their preference is on phase 1 and 2, that a deal can be reached, that you do not have to go back to this default position of Northern Ireland staying in the customs union. And that was the point that Simon Coveney, he's the Taoiseach, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Foreign Affairs, made when he spoke earlier.
We still have a clear position, as I see it, coming from the British government, that they are insisting that they will ensure that there will be no border on the island of Ireland, there will be no border between Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, and that the United Kingdom is leaving the customs union and single market. It's very hard to see how those three things are compatible. And so really the onus, I think, now is on the country that's leaving the European Union.
And there is a tight time schedule in all of this, because ultimately, if it's not agreed by October, if there is no compromise, well, then this is no longer legally binding, Sarah, but at the same time, that essentially means that the Brexit talks have broken down. So yet again, the Irish border, which nearly stopped the Brexit talks in December, having then been fudged again, is proving to be that most difficult of issue in these negotiations.
Indeed, Darren McCaffrey, thank you. Theresa May today rejected the EU's draft legal text on Brexit, saying no British Prime Minister could ever agree to it. She said the document would undermine the UK common market and threaten the country's constitutional integrity. Joining us now is Ashley Fox, leader of the Conservatives in the European Parliament, and the Labour MEP Jude Curtin-Darling. They join us from Brussels. Hello to you both. Ashley Fox, to you first. Michel Barnier this morning saying that his proposals, this draft agreement, was realistic. Theresa May making it clear that this is an absolute no-go zone. Where does this leave us?
At the starting point of its negotiations and asking for more than it expects to get. So the British will not agree to this document, and it will change during the negotiations, and we shouldn't be surprised at that.
Jude Curtin-Darling, so this is all just part of the tussle that we should expect in the negotiations, is that right?
Well, I find that response from Ashley Fox pretty incredible. We're 20 months after the referendum. Last December, Theresa May signed the first phase deal with the EU 27 in Brussels. This text effectively puts some of that deal into writing from the perspective of the EU side. And we've seen absolutely no movement from the UK government. The UK government could have put forward a text on their view on how to implement the December proper agreement. They've completely failed to. They're spending all of their time negotiating amongst themselves in the cabinet, and therefore the EU are basically setting the agenda and having the opportunity to put forward the first starting point of the negotiations because of the complete vacuum of ideas coming from the UK government.
Ashley Fox, respond to that if you will, that without any kind of credible options on the table from the Conservative government, the EU is putting forward its own proposals.
And the Prime Minister is going to make a very important speech on Friday setting out our proposals. But what I would say is that this document that the Commission have put forward does not accurately reflect what was agreed in December. They are proposing in the document put forward today a common regulatory area on the island of Ireland. That was not agreed in December and it's not acceptable, and the position will change. That will not be in the final draft.
Ashley, Jude Curtin-Darling, sorry, it's Theresa May has said, made it very clear, they did agree to that joint report in December, but this is totally and utterly unacceptable. And actually, is she not right in that Brussels is meddling in the UK constitutional affairs?
Well, in December, the UK government signed a document, that joint report, which said that there would be no hard border on the island of Ireland and that there would be regulatory alignment. They were asked at that point to put forward proposals of how you could avoid a hard border, the so-called A and B proposals. They've completely failed to put forward those proposals, and so the Commission has put forward the C proposal, which was in that report in December, which Theresa May signed up to, which was effectively that the island of Ireland would have to be within the customs union and covered by single market regulation to avoid that there be a hard border on the island of Ireland. That it was in the text. That was in the so-called paragraph 49, paragraph 50 of the joint agreement, which was signed in December. And we've had all of this period since December where the government could have come forward with very concrete proposals of how you would avoid a hard border, whether it was a proposal for a deep and comprehensive FTA or whether it's proposals, technical proposals about how you avoid a hard border, and they have completely failed. It's been a vacuum in terms of the negotiations in Brussels, and so the EU side, in the context that the clock is ticking, we probably have about 8 months until the end of negotiations. The EU side has decided to not wait any longer for the UK government, but to put proposals on the table themselves, in the same way that we as the Labour Party have decided it's too late waiting for the UK government to put forward proposals, so we are putting forward proposals to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland.
Ashley Fox, Michel Barnier today saying that if we want Brexit to be successful, we've got to pick up the pace. In the absence of any clarity from Theresa May, as you say, she's making a speech on Friday, but we still don't know yet what's going to be in that speech, do we? We're hearing from Brussels. They're calling the shots.
Not at all. We have made clear that what we would prefer to do is to settle the issue of the border in terms of a comprehensive free trade agreement between the EU and the UK.
But that's the cake and eat it option, isn't it?
And I would remind you and remind Jude that it's the EU that have said that they don't want to talk about trade at this stage. So we hope that we can sort out the issue of the border as part of that comprehensive trade agreement, because once we know that there will be no tariffs, once we know how trade will take place, we hope on a frictionless basis, we're then in a position to put forward a proper detailed proposal as to the border. So it's important that we discuss this in the context of the overall trading relationship.
Jude Curtin-Darling.
Yeah, it's a little bit disingenuous from Ashley, to be honest. We're in the situation that we're in today because we had a deal in December at the end of the first phase of the negotiations, and the day after that agreement was signed, David Davis came back and said, oh, it's not quite an agreement, it's a gentleman's agreement, and that called into question what had actually been agreed. And it was only as a result of that that the EU side said, actually, do you know know what, if you can't commit to an agreement in the first phase, then we need to have what we agreed written down on paper, and that's what's being presented today as a result of the fact that there was that loss of trust in December. If the government had been doing their job properly, after the December agreement, they would have come forward immediately with the proposals that they had of how to avoid that hard border on the island of Ireland. It is extremely politically sensitive, and what we've seen is ministers putting their feet in their mouth, whether it's about comparing the Northern Irish border to the border between different parts of London, or whether it's dismissing out of hand the Good Friday Agreement, which all undermines the trust in these negotiations even further. And it's a result of that the EU side has said, you know what, we're not going to wait for you any longer. We're going to put our proposals on the table, and then you will have to respond to our proposals.
Okay.
This is basic negotiations, and our government are failing us in how they're negotiating.
OK, we are out of time. Jude Curtin-Darling and Ashley Fox, thanks very much indeed. Former Prime Minister John Major has weighed in on the Brexit debate, saying that Theresa May should offer MPs a free vote on the final deal. He's been speaking to our political editor, Faisal Islam.
Sir John Major, what do you hope to achieve by, I know you don't mean to undermine the Prime Minister, but just in the middle of this negotiation, can this do anything other but undermine a sitting Conservative Prime Minister?
Well, I certainly hope so. That certainly wasn't my intention. My intentions were quite clear. Firstly, to draw attention to the emerging evidence that is coming daily from every side that both business and individuals are going to be worse off under every sort of Brexit that dispassionate people have examined. Now, that may sound as though it's an economic matter, but it isn't. It's going to affect everyday people and their families. They are going to be worse off. And I think that has to enter the debate to enable people in Parliament to realise, even if they're enthusiastic Brexiteers, that they've got to draw back from policies that will hurt their own constituents and people up and down the country. Areas like the North East could be very badly hit, and it seemed to me that somebody had to say that, and that I was in a position to do it.
This argument was put a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. It did not work. Why will it work now?
But it was done in the heat of an election debate. It wasn't done when it had been seriously examined by the IMF, by the OECD, by dispassionate Nobel Prize-winning economists, by the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, and so on. And it is now being done in great detail to an extent that simply didn't happen before. Even the government had produced their own analysis of 3 options, and all of them had people very much worse off than under the present situation. Now, I know of no precedent for a government proceeding with a policy that is self-evidently going to make our whole country and individuals within our country worse off. Parliament's role is to protect people, not to make them worse off.
So you're saying you want a free vote on this deal when it comes back, and if it's not a free vote, you're inviting Conservative MPs to vote with their consciences against the government will?
I'm inviting every MP to vote with their conscience. I think they always should. This isn't an everyday piece of policy. Every member of Parliament has from time to time walked through the lobby on an issue where they didn't agree because party loyalty and the way Parliament works demands it. But here is something unique. Here is something that is going to change our whole future, not just for us, but for generations to come. And we have to make sure that we make the right decision. So there is a very special, remarkable responsibility laid upon members of Parliament. And I think they should exercise that responsibility by looking at their conscience and saying, is this truly right for the people I was elected to represent? I'm not seeking to undermine the government. I'm seeking to protect the position of people who really don't have the capacity to speak in public and be heard, but whose lives might be damaged if we have the wrong form of Brexit.
Well, let's get more now on that and all the latest Brexit developments. We're joined from Westminster by the Labour MP, Umunna, who's a leading supporter of Open Britain, and we'll be speaking, hopefully, in a short time to the Conservative MP, Jacob Rees Mogg. Umunna, hello to you. What do you make of this intervention by Sir John Major today?
I think it's a very important intervention, and you would expect me as a Labour MP to be critical of a Conservative government, but it's really quite unprecedented for a former Conservative Prime Minister to criticise the current trajectory his Conservative government is taking us on. And the big takeaways for me are, first of all, this is a lot more complex than anyone thought it would be. You know, we had that debate in 2016, but we're dealing with a very new situation where there are new facts as to how this is going to impact on people, and things that people thought might happen, billions of pounds extra going to the NHS, for example, are simply not going to happen. The second point that he makes is we as parliamentarians, and I was talking about me as a Labour politician, in a way, you've got to forget about that. You've got to put the national interest first. This is a very unique situation, which is partly why it's so complex and it's taking so long. A lot of your viewers think, why can't you guys just get on and do this? It's just so complex. It affects every part of life. Who would have thought this would affect the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland? So it's absolutely right in those circumstances that we put the national interest first, scrutinise what government is doing, because whatever you thought about the decision to leave the European Union, the government didn't have a mandate to pursue this trajectory at all costs and in any form. So we've got to do the job that we were elected to do, which is to look out for our constituents through this process.
So let's talk about the Irish border. Michel Barnier today talking about option C, this backstop option, which Theresa May has said is absolutely a no-go zone. Where does this leave us?
Well, the only way of avoiding a hard border in Northern Ireland, and if you had a hard border, this would threaten the Good Friday Agreement, which let's not forget brought peace to the island of Ireland after decades of bloodshed. The only way to avoid a hard border is not only through staying in the customs union, but also the single market. And what the EU's come forward and suggested here is that for the sake of not having that hard border, Northern Ireland should stay in the customs union and to all intents and purposes, the single market as well. Now, clearly, that is not a desirable situation because it would mean a different...
That's not what people voted for, is it? I mean, that's more of the same.
Well, people didn't vote to split up the United Kingdom in the process of Brexit. So I think the only way you're going to be able to avoid this issue of having a hard border in Northern Ireland is for the whole of the United Kingdom to stay in the customs union and the single market. And let's not forget, by the way, if you want to talk about mandates, the Prime Minister put the notion of leaving the single market and the customs union at front and centre in her manifesto in 2017, and she lost her majority. So she actually doesn't have a mandate to take the whole of Britain out of
the... in the Labour Party manifesto, weren't they?
The Labour Party manifesto said that we would seek to continue to get the benefits of the single market and the customs union. It didn't say how. The European Union has since been very clear that you can only continue to get those benefits if you stay part of the single market and the customs union. That is absolutely clear. And I really think, to be frank, there's a lot of delusion about what we can get from this process. You know, there's a suggestion that we can not only leave the European Union, but leave the customs union, leave the single market, and get all the benefits. Now, why on earth would you be allowed to get the benefits of a club without being in it and having the obligations and paying the subscription fee? I mean, what, you wouldn't join the club?
OK, Jacob, let's bring in Jacob Rees Mogg and ask him that question. Jacob Rees Mogg, are you delusional? Is the only option here, in order to protect the Good Friday Agreement, to remain in a customs union and the single market?
Oh, absolutely not. That means we don't leave the European Union. Those are the essential pillars of the European Union. And I would dispute that there are advantages of being in either of those. The customs union is a protectionist racket that increases the price of food, clothing and footwear in the United Kingdom. And the internal market simply piles regulation upon regulation on British businesses and makes us less efficient and competitive. Being out of those two is a huge advantage for us. And the issue in Northern Ireland, as has been said by a European Parliamentary Committee, can be solved by technological solutions, some of which have been trialled in other parts of the world.
But where are those technological solutions? Because Michel Barnier is saying that the clock is ticking. We've got to up the pace here. And in the absence of any solutions presented by the government, the EU is giving its options, option A, B or C. Option A, the cake and eat it argument, which it's already said no to. Option B, the technological answer, which it's called the Narnia option. And option C, ultimately, Northern Ireland
well,
is
I think
annexed.
that's silly. And Well, option C would be in breach of the confidence and supply agreement between the Conservatives and the Democratic Unionist Party. So if the government went for option C, it would fall. It is not a serious option. It's not one the government could accept. We cannot split the United Kingdom. Northern Ireland is as much part of our country as Somerset is, and for the European Union to be proposing splitting up the United Kingdom is quite improper of it, and it's an improper suggestion for them to make. The technological solution is to say that you can have trusted trader schemes that exist in other parts of the world, that you can settle customs duties if there are any. We may have a free trade arrangement, and therefore there won't be any customs duties beyond the border. Bear in mind there is already a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. There's a border for excise duties, there's a border for VAT, there's a border for illegal immigration, all of which are enforced separately on the different sides, and these are dealt with by efficient technological solutions. So I think the problems are being overstated, and that the border can be kept free of physical infrastructure and men in peaked caps. What is, of course, going to change is that there will be a different regulatory and customs system, slightly elaborated from where we are now.
Umunna, you're shaking your head. Is this not simpler than we're making it out to be, as Jacob Rees Mogg says?
This is fantasy stuff from Jacob. Let me just say a few things about what he said. He said if we stay in the customs union and we stay in the single market, to all intents and purposes we're a member of the EU. Well, there are non-EU members of the single market, and Turkey has a customs union arrangement with the European Union, and it isn't in the single market, and it isn't in the European Union. And let's not beat around the bush. The regulations that Jacob complains about, that we benefit from, as a result of our membership of the European Union and the single market, like the working time regulations, they protect your viewers' rights at work, your viewers' rights as a consumer, and our environment. They mean that you have the right to pay time off, you know, all the different rights that you enjoy at work. And his red tape, or regulation as he calls it, is basically your rights at work. And I think, you know, many of the Brexiters should be honest about this. They believe in deregulation. They see your rights at work as standing in the way of business, when actually there's no evidence for that whatsoever. And I haven't spoken to one EU official, one member state government, who believes this technology solution that's been put forward will solve the problem of having a hard border in Northern Ireland. And the point is, by being in the single market and the customs union, you've got frictionless trade between Northern Ireland and Ireland at the moment. You come out, you don't get that.
Jacob Rees Mogg.
Well, Mr. Umunna has elided two things. Turkey is in a customs union but still has border controls. Norway is in the single market but still has border controls.
Which is why
there is no country that is both in the customs union. And that was my point. If you are in both the customs union and in the single market, you are still in the European Union. That is the key point here, and that was the point I was making. So to try and pretend that because countries that are individually in one are able to be outside the European Union means that if you're in both, you're not in the European Union, is, I think, dissembling. But I want to come on to this issue of regulation. VAT on tampons, on electricity, on gas is set by the European Union. We would be free to remove VAT on all those areas if we were outside the European Union. The high price of air trainers, no doubt very popular with Sky viewers, on oranges is more expensive because of EU tariffs, which we would be able to remove outside the customs union. These are the advantages we get. We can set policies to suit the British people. And the key thing to remember in our negotiation is the strength of our position, that when we leave the European Union, we won't have to impose any border in Ireland if we don't want to. That will be a unilateral decision to be taken by the British government. But if we do, that's what the European Union wants, and we go along with it. The losers will be the Republic of Ireland. The economy of the Republic of Ireland would be in very bad shape if we imposed the common external tariff on them. Irish agriculture, with tariffs on beef of up to 70%, would be ruined if we imposed that. So the Irish have a huge interest in keeping the border open.
OK, Jacob Rees Mogg, I'm sorry to cut you short.
Won't work.
I'm sorry to cut you short, but we are out of time. Jacob Rees Mogg and Umunna, thank you both very much indeed.
I've been getting away with it all my